Today I'm going to talk about Dart and Dart's, I think, full stack potential. I will start with the backend development. If there will be another event, then that will be next year. We could talk about AngularDart or Flutter Web, desktop, and I think that's pretty much it. And of course Flutter. And so in case though you probably know, Flutter is Google's UI toolkit for building natively compiled apps for mobile web desktop from a single code base. I think this really captures well the promise of Flutter. This is from Matt Carroll, that you should never have to say no to your designer. I think hopefully that's true while you are developing Flutter apps, but we'll see. So if you are developing Flutter apps, you already write Dart code. So I would like to share my experience with other companies, because I think this helps you understand how I think, and also I think your environment might differ, so your experience level, priorities, background could all be different. And if that's true and that's different, then it's likely that your opinion will be different about Dart as a full stack language. I made this poll at the last Flutter Munich event. Basically, I see that not everyone would like to use one language for all their tasks. So I think that can be maybe performance is or more important for you. Sorry, or you don't mind changing languages during development, but for me it was really, I don't like changing languages all the time while working. So this was the first company where I worked. So this was our tech stack, so we used JavaScript and Python, and I was basically happy to use JavaScript because that was the first language that I really learned well. I was happy to write Python because I really like this language, and also Java. But then they asked me to, okay, could you jump in and do all these PHP tasks? Okay, could you fix this CoffeeScript utility? And then it was, I think it's just so difficult to keep in mind all the gotchas of the language, all the tiny things that are different than in other languages. And I wanted to talk about my Ruby experience. It was also that way that, okay, could you please could you do this task? It has to be in Ruby. And basically I just tried to, I didn't spend time learning Ruby. I just jumped right in and started basically Googling, searching for answers, and I was trying to make these connections, like, okay, what's with the strings, how do I declare them, how do I write if-else, how do I write objects, okay, it's not called, so the objects are the objects, and not the dictionaries or hash maps. So it was very annoying to basically, so I was very slow, and at the same time I didn't have time to learn Ruby because we wanted to finish a task quickly. And I think word for word translations don't always work. This is one example that I had, that in English you say when something really annoys you, that this is such bullshit, or something like that. And when my fellow Hungarians would try to express the same feeling without basically learning English properly, they would say horse dick, which doesn't make much sense, right? So you would say like, excuse me, horse dick? Why are you talking about this? It's very strange. Please stop. And I think like the double equals with JavaScript is also kind of like this, because people think it's familiar, you would know how to use it, but at the same team we had the issue that some senior developer jumped into JavaScript to fix something and spent basically one day trying to figure out why his code was not working, and it was because of the double equals, triple equals. And I think it's bringing in more languages to your language stack really have a cost, and it's also, you are not only picking the language, you pick a testing framework, you figure out how to lint, how to build, and all these, you need to make all these decisions. And if every time you start a new project, then every time you need to understand and learn more and more without actually delivering much value. So the second team I worked on was basically just TypeScript, and I really liked it because if you have one language, then people have time to learn the language well. You don't need to learn 8 languages, you can learn one language well. You can do code reviews, you can basically switch from backend to front end, you can talk about, I don't know, TypeScript or about the language, and you also learn the tooling well. And I think having one language is, I think it's very appealing. And now, this is the company I work for. So we started with Dart for the mobile app. We started with Go on the backend. We also have a firmware that has to be in C++. We also have a couple of cloud functions. I had to write them in TypeScript because, I mean, I didn't have to write, but that was I think the easiest choice. It was the language that had the best documentation, and this is how I felt. But I mean, I'm not sure if, because there are valid reasons for changing, for using multiple languages. It's faster sometimes, but I'm still undecided. So I think reducing the number of languages can be worth it. So Dart could be one soon. So this is another poll from the same event, and I think the interesting part is that most people felt that the language is easy and they felt productive. I think this is important in a language. Of course, this poll was done at a Flutter Munich event, so we are a bit biased because we come to these events, but anyway, so I think Dart is growing really fast. This is the GitHub October's survey or statistics, and Dart is the fastest growing, like the change in programming language use increase was the highest last year. And I think what's important to recognize that yes, Flutter is driving this growth at the moment, but I think it could change, and we could use Dart on the backend and on other parts as well. So I think Dart is, as I mentioned, it's growing. It's also improving. So it received small improvements, like the spread operator, the if in a collection, and the for in a collection. So Dart also has now from 2.5 FFI Um, so you could, it's a foreign function interface, I think, and you can call basically C APIs, so you can embed C code in your Dart code. And also I think Dart native is very interesting because it gives you a way to basically create self-contained executables. So the size of, for example, your Docker container could be much tinier. So this is one blog post that I read, and this person basically reduced the size of the Docker image from 200 megabytes to 20. So, and with 20 megabytes, it's like a normal. I mean, it's not the smallest, but it's certainly much better than 200 megabytes. So I think it has potential. So you can use Flutter already on Android and on iOS. This is probably the part that most of us are familiar with. And Dart, you can also use AngularDart for web development. This is, I think, the Google Ads dashboard. So AngularDart is being used by like a real project and not just some obscure, unimportant websites. This is, I think, it proves that you can make it work. You can also use, apart from AngularDart, you can use Flutter Web, which is in tech preview. Maybe I'm not a huge fan of Flutter Web yet, but maybe hopefully this will change. Or you can also just keep it simple and use the Dart HTML library, or you can use that library to build your own framework. If you want to try that out, you could search for Stagehand, which is a Dart scaffolding tool. So, and you can create like a simple web application. And also with Flutter, it could also work on desktop as desktop app. Today I want to talk about the backend. I think these are the most interesting so these are the best options you have based on my research. There are others as well. So there's Angel, Aqueduct, and Shelf. Shelf is very, like it feels vanilla. But I think Aqueduct and Angel they both look good. I tried Aqueduct because somehow it felt more familiar, and I think the documentation was better. Basically I want to show you some examples about Aqueduct and how it looks like, how it feels like, and how you accomplish like common tasks on the backend. So let's say, I mean it's not the most interesting example, but it's very simple. So you want to have the health endpoint, and let's say if you have a GET request, you return 200, and if you have a post, then you return some kind of error. This is how you would start. So with Aqueduct, you basically have the application channel. This is the main class. This is where things start. And this class has a getter, which is the entry point, and this will be a router. If you ever worked on the backend, I think the concept of routing is probably familiar for you. So let's say we specify, okay, this is the health endpoint, and let's link that route to the controller. And the controller looks like this. Basically, it has a handle function method, and you receive the request, and then you have the method, you have the headers, all the, I think it's probably familiar. And with controllers, you can either return a response or a request. If you return the request, it will continue on the chain of controllers. If you return a response, then it will basically send whatever you set the response to the user. So you also have the models. This is basically an authentication example. Aqueduct has authentication, basically a module, a couple of classes that help you with authenticating the user, and this is basically all you need. You just extend you just extend one class, and by that class you need to configure, of course, your database, and you need to set up a couple of routes. For example, the register, this would receive a username and password, and the token is basically just checking if the token, it gives you a token. And in this example, I created this /protected resource, and you can see how you can chain the different controllers. So first you check if the authentication is right, and then you, in this example, I just return an OK response. And this is how you can, this is the resource controller. What I wanted to show here is you can bind these different parameters. So for example, everything that is in the body, the framework will basically serialize this for you and into a user object, and then you can use it in your code. They also have many different request bindings. Just a couple of it. You can get information out of the header, the query, path, so you can make your code much more readable this way, and I think that's very handy. And yeah, so I think one last thing I wanted to show is basically the managed object controller. So this is very good for CRUD applications, so create, read, update, delete. You can list the instances of this resource, of this object, and with this class you can basically have everything out of the box. You also query, basically you can set the count as query parameter, and this will be all handled for you, and you don't need to write this code yourself. And you can also tweak if you don't like the way they do it, or you want to do something custom, you can just subclass this controller and basically customize however you want it. So this is a managed object, which basically corresponds to a database column and rows in the database. And so basically to have like create, read, update, delete, all you need to do is declare this model and then create link this model through the managed object controller, and then you have everything. You can create labels and so on. So I think the documentations, the docs is pretty good. So you can you can just look it up, one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many. You can check. I think the documentation is quite good, so I didn't want to show more code because I didn't want to spend too much time on just code. The migration tool worked I think, relatively well. So you just change the model, generate the migration. Generate the migration, then you will have a migration file. You can edit it before you execute it. And one thing I didn't like is that only the upgrade is automatically generated. So if the downgrade function, which is basically reversing the migration, is not implemented, I don't know why. And the framework also only supports Postgres. So this just might be interesting for you. With all these annotations, the framework can generate open API specification for you, and which is basically a YAML file or JSON file, and it declares all your resources, and you can use this JSON or YAML file in Postman, or this is the Swagger UI, and you can browse your endpoints. And I think it's very good for if you have multiple projects and you don't want to look it up in the code, you can just start with this, and I think it's very good for learning. There are some, so for example, there are some negative parts as well. So for example, this looks very interesting, that Dart to native. You can create really small images, but there are some known limitations. One is very relevant for backend. Most of the backend frameworks is that the Dart to native will not basically compile if you depend on the Dart mirrors library, and most of the backend frameworks do rely on mirrors, and you can also not use it in Flutter. So maybe if mirrors is not familiar to you, then maybe it's because of this, because you can't use it in Flutter either.
But what does it do? What does mirrors do?
Reflection.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. It's
That's
confusingly
dirty.
named.
You don't want reflection.
Use code generation instead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is what. But there is a way out, and I think they promised. They didn't promise it explicitly. They didn't promise, but there will be there will be a solution for this. They said Q4, which is basically now. I think the solution will be coming, maybe not Q4, but soon. Basically, I think the way they do it is that you need to have a different build step, and they will remove all this reflection code, and it will be, I think, generated, most likely. So I think, I think things work, and things worked quite well, in my opinion. It was easy to set things up. It was easy to create different resources. It was easy to customize things. I really like the documentation. I like having to use one language, but I understand that it's not for everyone, or maybe you just don't like Dart that much, which is fine. I think there are not enough Dart packages for the backend, but there are new packages being developed. So I was searching for backend packages, so I just saw there's someone working on Cassandra packages. I think it wasn't there 10 days ago. There's basically, so I think package ecosystem for backend is not very good. But if you like to get your hands dirty and you would like to develop something, then you can fix this solution. You can fix this problem, and basically, at least you don't need to feel guilty if you write, like in JavaScript, if you write another framework, everyone will be like, why are you writing another framework? But I think in Dart you can do it because there are not many super awesome options, but there are good options. Performance, I think it really depends on how much performance you need. I think in some cases developer productivity is more important than how fast the code runs. So I think my conclusion is that Dart is not the obvious choice for backend development because of these reasons. Like, there are no great libraries yet. There are some beta libraries and packages, but most of them are maintained by one person. They spend 2 weeks on it, and they probably not going to check the package again for the next 2 years. But it's also true that maybe Dart is not the obvious choice for backend yet. Maybe it's just wishful thinking, but I think with Node.js, everyone was like, first, you can't use JavaScript on the backend, and I think today is something that no one really bats an eye. It's very, I think most people consider it completely okay. And that was it, so thank you. Yes?
Did you ever look into code sharing with the client and the backend, like at least sharing the models and having something like this going? Did you try that?
No, with Dart, no. Do you have any more specific question?
No, because I was thinking about doing that, and it would be cool if that actually works, like especially with because I saw that you defined some models and that were used with the database, and I thought it could be tricky to have that in the app working as well. That's why I asked, but if you never tried it, then...
yeah, so I used TypeScript, and then it was the similar conversation with my team, and I mean, at least the conclusion that I got to is that I think, so there are some code that you can, like validation, for example, you can also share it with the client, and then you receive the errors much faster. You don't need to do this asynchronous route. Okay, make the request, check the response. So I think this is some code that is easy to bring to the client and share. And I think probably I wouldn't share the ORM models because they have too much magic. But maybe you could create like some, I don't know, like some abstract class, and I would probably keep the code sharing a bit thinner, so that you only share the responses and not the whole structure. But that could also be maybe generated. So I don't know if so with the OpenAPI specifically with this Swagger tool, you can basically, I think, generate these. So maybe it's not that important.
But it should work, Okay, cool.
Have you tried AngularDart?
So not extensively, so like an hour. So that's...
So I wanted to ask you something about AngularDart, because I don't know what to think about it. It's like somebody would tell me Java, C++, so is it... it's Dart, but then it's structured like Angular, or why is it called like that?
Yeah, I think it has similar origins to AngularJS, but I think the two have diverged, so they are not really on feature parity, or they don't even try it. But basically, if you have Dart code, you can compile it to JavaScript, and then you can basically write a framework with it, and this is what they did with AngularDart. So they write the framework in Dart, and then it will be compiled to JavaScript, and then it's like any other framework. Yep.
Is there also a Dart React?
Yes, there is. But it's. I think it's much worse. So probably not because of React or Angular, but I think it's the AngularDart project is a project that is being used by Google, like real projects, and based on my first impressions about basically Vue Dart and React Dart, they look like someone's weekend project. So it's not, I don't think you should really compare them because they're the completely different level based on the little research I did on this.
But the React and Vue Dart implementations use the JavaScript core of React or Vue, right? They are not rebuilding everything in Dart.
I don't know. I didn't check.
They are not like rebuilding everything from scratch. They're like using some of the APIs and provide you a wrapper, but for like really basic stuff, they don't support it.
Yeah.
So nah, don't do it.
Yeah.
Shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you contribute to it, no.
I don't know. TypeScript, I think, is the better choice for web development, in my opinion.
Maybe,
Shots fired.
Yeah, there is something to it. So I think, I mean, I wouldn't say that TypeScript is not gonna be there in 5 years because of Dart. So that's true. Like that's obvious that TypeScript is gonna grow much, like especially on the web. I think TypeScript is just more important now and probably forever. That's my.
Can it compile to native code yet, or can it? Can TypeScript compile to native code? No, right?
I don't think so. But it's
But it could compile to JavaScript, and JavaScript can compile to like the WebAssembly, right? And then it's like, so technically, no.
Yeah, I mean there are ways around everything. I just most people don't do it.
Is there another way to create apps for mobile and the web except Dart and Flutter? Like a reasonable way to create apps for mobile and the web, so websites and mobile apps? Because you can do that with Flutter right now, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know of any other tech out there that allows you to do mobile apps and web apps in a reasonable way without like running an emulator or anything like that. Like PhoneGap doesn't count.
But basically build a website and run the website in your smartphone app, right?
Progressive web app or
But I guess React Native in a way? No. No, they like separate things, React and React
Native. React Native is basically letting you write JavaScript, but it renders native widgets. So it's using the Android SDK or iOS.
But don't they have like an abstraction? So like on web, then they create like web views and like
no, there's no such thing, as far as I know. But
didn't Microsoft do something like that?
Xamarin,
Microsoft?
but that's shit.
Yeah.
No, it's horrible.
Yeah, I used it.
I think Microsoft has built React Native that renders Windows native widgets. So you write your application logic in React, but the rendering is done by the Windows UI. So you can attach it to different renderers. That's the concept of React. So you have your application core, and then you have a renderer that can render in whatever system you need.
But as far as I know, React Native doesn't render natively on Android and iOS.
It does. It does use the native widgets.
You can see that. It's fun.
Is Ionic or doesn't count?
I didn't hear a lot
Ionic.
of. I mean, I don't know a lot of happy Ionic developers. But for some projects, probably it's good enough. But yeah,
You said Flutter for web. You didn't like that? What is
I mean, it's still in preview, tech preview, so it's not. So it's not. I think it's tech preview is before beta, so it's like very. I think it's early to say, but So I like Flutter on the mobile much more than on the web, because I think on the web you have basically more proven technologies, and basically maybe rendering everything on your own is not the best. And also, like the apps that I tried, I mean, these were simple, small apps that people hacked together, like some portfolio app in Flutter, and it was, I think it just feels strange because double click doesn't work. You can't select easily text. But I think those could be fixed. But for what I think is that Flutter Web could be very good for apps that you wouldn't bring to the web. So it's like a quick win, in my opinion, that if you already have a mobile app, and then if Flutter Web becomes easy to use, and then you can just put the same app on web, and then if you see that people are using your app on the web very often, or then you can maybe Flutter Web will be better, or you can just implement it in some other frameworks. But I think it's really good for like these quick wins that you already have a mobile app, and if it's easy to bring that in a matter of hours to the web, then I think it's good, at least today. But it's still in tech preview, so it could be better. So I think.
I think it's also highly dependent on dependencies, right? They need to be compatible with web.
Yes.
So for example, if you store to shared preferences on your smartphone, this is not going to work one-to-one on web.
Yes.
So you need a module that then stores this in the web storage. And
we had
basically everything that you use needs a web version or equivalent.
I think like already some of the libraries start to support web as well.
Yeah.
Like Simon, who's here sometimes, I'm not sure if he's here. He also has a library that works on web, but for example, in our case, we also built an AngularDart application that like shares code, and we had to abstract a lot of the stuff just to get it working in web. Like also a simple example that you said, but also like more complex stuff like WebSockets and other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if Google supports Firebase for all the platforms, then Dart would be nice, right? But I think they currently don't support the web version of Firebase in the package.
Not
for
from
Dart,
the
right?
same source, no.
Yeah.
You have to abstract it again and then
Yeah.
Okay, so I think if someone has more questions. No, okay.
Hello?
Sorry.
It's not a deployment, an Aqueduct application. How it is deployed? Comes it with its own server, or is it deployed with Apache, Tomcat, or what?
No, I don't think so. So basically, you can put it in a container and run it, but the container is, for example, pretty big, so it maybe not.
I'm not so familiar with container technology. Are you mean talking of Docker or something?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Basically, it's similar to Node.js, that you just start the application and it runs and it listens to requests, and
I do not down to JavaScript.
Okay.
It has its own web server, right?
Yeah. Yes.
That's the answer.
Okay. Then like a 20-minute break. 15 minute break.
Yeah, 20 is also okay.